and he and 7 colleagues were stopped by the RSF. They were spread-eagled on the floor. All of their possessions, apart from their passports, were robbed, and then he had to continue his way on foot to the evacuation point. And it's extremely difficult to get there. One thing is that transportation has become extremely limited as the demand for it has surged. At the moment, there is a ceasefire that's been in place since Sunday night, midnight, which is supposed to last 72 hours. That has brought a relative lull in the fighting. When I was speaking to people in parts of Khartoum yesterday, including Brits who were looking for a way out and waiting to be told about the evacuation flights, I could hear gunfire and shelling in the backgrounds. But in general, the fighting has subsided, but it still means that Khartoum is quite a dangerous place, particularly on the outskirts, which you would have to travel to get to the airstrip. People are talking about militias who are stopping buses, private buses that are being hired by people extorting money. People are talking about roaming gangs of looters that are robbing people, setting fire to homes, looting businesses. And there's also the rapid support forces on the street. I spoke to one British man, the wife of one British man. His wife was at their home in Berkshire, and he was trying to get to an evacuation point from his neighbourhood in Bari, which has been the scene of quite heavy fighting. It's near the presidential palace. And he was actually going to an evacuation point arranged by his employer, the Dow Group, which is the biggest company in Sudan. And he and 7 colleagues were stopped by the RSF. They were spread-eagled on the floor. All of their possessions, apart from their passports, were robbed, and then he had to continue his way on foot to the evacuation point, and eventually is now safely on a bus to Egypt. But it's still very dangerous to even traverse the centre of the city, let alone the outskirts, which are much more unstable.
That puts people in extremely difficult situations, because for many of them, their supplies of water, food, they're running out.
Yeah, and aid groups and also people who are living it are warning of a massive looming humanitarian crisis. There's some people still have running water and power, but lots of people don't. During this lull in the fighting, people can get outside to try and find food, but in many cases the supermarkets are shut, or the stores are empty, or the supply chains are broken down. So it's going to become increasingly difficult over the next few days.
For anyone who's unsure, can you just remind us what it is that's driving this conflict? Because there's no real end in sight to this, is there?
No, so in a nutshell, Sudan was ruled for a long time by a strongman dictator called Omar al-Bashir. He was overthrown in a revolution in 2019. That revolution was very much led by civil society and civilians, but also by the military too. And then that civilian transition was derailed by a coup in 2021, which was engineered by the 2 men who are fighting now, the head of the army and the head of this militia group, the Rapid Support Forces, which grew out of the Janjaweed militias accused of genocide in Darfur in the 2000s. And now those 2 men who engineered that coup in 2021 are now fighting each other for total control after a deadline passed for their forces to be merged and to hand over to a civilian administration.
In the meantime, of course, there are these desperate attempts to get as many people to safety as possible. The Prime Minister said he couldn't guarantee that this airfield north of Khartoum would be able to remain open for much longer. How hopeful are you, just reporting on, speaking to people in the situation, that as many people as possible will find some place of safety?
The Brits I speak to are very pessimistic and are very disappointed with the slowness of the government's response. As you said, there's been 3 flights so far, more expected today, about 260 people. But by contrast, the French and the Germans have flown out from that same airstrip 1,000 of their nationals already. They started much earlier. Yesterday, about 1,000 Turks arrived overland into Ethiopia, where I live, and another 1,600 foreign citizens took a boat from Port Sudan to Saudi Arabia. So these are when we talk about the numbers of the Brits being flown out, it's very small. There's 2,000, maybe even 4,000 Brits who are in Sudan, and only 260 evacuated so far, which is a very small number compared to other nationals.